past it because I want to give people a chance to ask a question. Does anyone have a question? If you put your hand up, we can get a microphone to you. I think we'll go straight to the question so we can definitely get in some views from people. There you go.
Hi, Dominic Brown from Highways Magazine. A question for Tricia Hayes, if I may. In the Reece Jeffries Rose Fund report, there was a very clever equation for how they worked out where the MRN would be. You spoke of needing a standardized approach. Will you adopt a similar type of equation to allow there to be transparency and avoid any issues of kind of political interference? And also, will you guarantee that there will be no competitive bidding for funding for the MRN?
Okay, so to take the second question first, which is by far the easiest, no. I think on the first question, I think the picture I was trying to paint in my remarks was one where the kind of network definition question is one where we think that kind of largely a principles-driven approach is the right thing. So given the important job the MRN has to do as a driver of resource allocation and a kind of strategic economic powerhouse, then I don't think we're in a place where we can simply take each region's own vision of its own network and then pull them together in some kind of national map. Having said that, I think we are humble enough to recognize that there may be special cases. So I think what we're anticipating is a network where we start with one which, like the Reece Jeffries one, starts by being defined by a set of principles, how it's used, what kind of journeys it supports, and then gives a little bit of flexibility around the edges where that kind of principles-based approach spits out a result that for a particular road is just not sensible.
Rupert and Martin, can I bring you both in here sort of quickly? Because it has been sold, certainly to, well, all the press releases and things I've had. It's like, it's £1 billion a year for bypasses. That's kind of what I'm seeing. I think Tricia's saying it's actually going to be a lot more sort of sophisticated than that. But that's the stuff I've been pumped at the moment from people. What do you think? What are your sort of fears over it? Do you worry it's just going to be big lump sums of money, or would you like to be able to apply, for example, to just fix one of the worst potholed roads in your area? You know, to take it down to that kind of level, which it doesn't look like it would apply to.
I mean, I do agree with Martin, and the point that made about competitions, I think, was well made. And for me, it's about the complete package. So it's not just about a particular pinch point at a particular location. There's a whole asset there that needs to be considered as a complete package. And you know, one of my concerns and one of Adept's concerns is that this investment in new things is all well and good, but you've got to keep the windows painted. You've got to keep the maintenance up. And local authorities, as Martin will undoubtedly mention, are coming under increasing financial pressure. You know, just the adult social care bill alone would wipe out highways. And I think you know, that needs to be the focus on the complete package.
Yeah, just to agree with Rupert, I mean, he's absolutely right. I mean, adult social care and children, I mean, I always get the comment, you know, why haven't you got enough money to resurface this road or whatever? You know, I pay enormously high council tax, you ought to be able to fix my pothole. The reality is adult social care and children's services are just sucking, you know, vast amounts of money in local authorities. There is so little left, the routine maintenance of existing roads. So when you look at the, you know, the major roads network as a concept, it cannot just be about bits of money to build new bypasses at key pinch points. We need that too, don't get me wrong, but much of this is already in pretty poor condition. And you've got to look at the whole package. You've got to look at upgrading and repairing a lot of the existing roads and not just building bits of new bypass and saying, hey, we've got a major roads network. That isn't the answer.
Tricia, I mean, could people potentially apply for repairs? I mean, could you do that as well as something? Could that be part of the criteria?
I mean, I think there's a couple of observations on that. I mean, first is, I think just to look at the MRN in isolation will give you a very partial picture of the whole of local road transport funding. And I think when you're thinking about the different jobs that different funding streams do, you need to kind of bring them all in. So, we have got maintenance funding, we have got large local majors programs, we have got funding support housing, and I think there's I think there's a job for us to do right now of trying to bring a bit of coherence to all that, to what is becoming a bit of an increasingly complicated environment. I think the kind of second thing I would want to say, and again, this is something I said earlier, the MRN is a marathon, not a sprint. I mean, we definitely do have a long-term view that what we're creating over what I think will be quite a long period of time is something which works as a system, where we have expectations in terms of standards and performance. Now, that's not to say that that's something we can get to in one jump, and it's also not an argument against building bypasses. But I think we need to hang on in there for the long term, rather than focus too much on what we do with the very first allocations of money.
Hugh, do you think we're being a bit ungrateful because we've got, Highways England and 5 years worth, huge amounts of money, and then potentially more money for a strategic, roads network, for the major roads network as well? Would you like to have some of that stuff?
I think anybody would like certainty, that's for sure. I think it doesn't matter if you're a civil servant or I've got colleagues here from the consultancy world in Scotland and engineering companies. Yes, people would like certainty, but there is the reality of how we are currently funded and how we have to administer our roads. I'm interested in the whole MRN debate because these things, also the south of the border, are closely followed north of the border. As are other things which happen in England, for example, the role of the Transport Focus Group and ORR. We're having a debate in Scotland again around our local roads, and I think how the condition of the local road network in Scotland, I think I'm being disingenuous, is not on the same level as it is for the strategic network. How they've got to that place is a matter of debate, and that's about block funding. So we're not immune to the debate, so we are watching it. Would I like more money over more years? Yes.
I could probably squeeze in one more quick question at the front here.
So, my name is Vip Gandhi from Jacobs. Interesting what we heard today, but I think from my point of view, the question that I've got is when we were listening to Jim earlier, he was talking about, we're talking about BCRs, right? Benefits to cost ratios. And so it's okay for the national road network. However, when it comes to local roads, we need a link there. And BCR alone doesn't work. It's okay for the national road network, but when you're looking at a more sub-regional approach or a more regional approach, it becomes more difficult. And then what happens, it doesn't become integrated. So, what are your views on, how we're going to try and link that together? Because this has been going on for quite a few years now. Anyone can answer that.
Hello, Bip. Nice to see you. I completely agree that there's a bit of a danger that we see. We describe the way in which we take decisions on where to put money in very black and white terms, and we overemphasize the job that BCRs can do in making sure that we get value for money. I'm completely with you that value for money is much, much more than BCRs. It's about having a clear strategic case for what you're trying to do, understanding that it's practically deliverable, and understanding how it contributes to some of the bigger things that you're trying to achieve. And I think actually at a practical level, in my experience, local road schemes don't struggle to have good BCRs. Local road schemes tend to have some of the best BCRs of any of the ways in which we can spend our money in transport. So if you feel those messages aren't getting across, then maybe there's a communication thing we need to do.
Yeah, any other views on how, in wider terms, how you justify a road?
I think we've long understood in Scotland that it just can't be about pure money. You can't monetize everything, and you could try to do that in terms of things like social inclusion and environment, but sometimes you have to make bold decisions because rightly it feels the right thing to do. But the way we deliver roads in this country, I'm talking a couple wider in the UK, where it's exposed to statutory processes and consultations and so on and so forth, you have to have a robust argument to go forward. So there has to be a way. We've tried to do that through the STAG process, looking across the 5 areas rather than just the economic, although clearly environmental comes into that as well, and accident savings. But there is a place for it. If I was to maybe digress for a second, that, for example, we were doing first-year rate of returns on our accident schemes, and we'd worked through them to the point where there was no longer that many first-year rate of returns, but we'd allocated all this money. We thought, this is crazy. Why are we being bound by process? Why can't we just step out of this and go, do you know what, if it takes 3 years, well, the average speed camera scheme in the A9, I think it cost us around about £2 million. And it wasn't going to pay for itself in the first year, but by goodness, it's paid for itself after 3 years.
Was there one more question at the back? So, yeah, go for it.
Question for Patricia. It's Karen Sanderson at Transport for the North. You talked about setting overarching objectives and priorities for the MRN. What role do you see the subnational transport bodies like Transport for the North having in advising you on regional needs and priorities for the MRN?
Thank you. Sorry, do you hear me? Thank you very much. Good question. I mean, I think you'll see when you see the consultation that for us, the subnational transport bodies are absolutely at the heart of the way in which we're proposing to roll out the decision-making around the MRN. I mean, the purpose of the MRN is to identify the strategically important roads, and many of those function at regional level. So regional bodies are absolutely best placed to kind of help us understand what is a sensible order to tackle problems in. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to guarantee that we're going to accept every word that regional bodies say about what their priorities should be. And with TFM specifically, we're having a very lively conversation about the work that you've done on your own MRN. But you have a really important role to play in making sure that the planning is sensible and that the strategic needs of the region are clearly identified. And I hope you'll see more detail on that in our consultation.
Martin.
Just to build on that, I go back to what I said. I think this is more, if you're Transport for the North, Midlands Connect, Heartlands, or wherever, it's more than just about the road, it's actually about the economy. So for me, one of the key selling points, if you're any of the subnational transport bodies, is how well linked are you in with your, whether it's local enterprise partnership or whatever your business drivers are, because fundamentally it has to be delivering economic growth, and behind that, transportation and housing. So for me, start with the economy, start therefore with where housing has to go, start therefore with how transport fits into that. Don't just start with transport.
Rupert.
I'd sort of add on to that. The legislation's quite clear. The transport strategy, the transport investment needs to facilitate economic growth. And it's sort of going back to that exam question. That's what's set out. I guess the other thing on the MRN, which I'll just add on to, and it's sort of food for thought, really. What's really important is how the user gets from A to B, how we get around. It doesn't matter who manages it. It's about defining the outcomes that we want to achieve for a transport network. It matters not who does it, who lays the tarmac or track. Defining those outcomes and then having some sort of mechanism, potentially through the STBs, to monitor the performance of the wider network, I think presents an opportunity.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. And we have overrun a bit. We can go to your lunch now. After lunch, we're talking about that very, very uncontroversial subject, roads funding, and what you do with the tax. So that should be a belter after lunch. But please thank Tricia Hayes, Hugh Gillis, Rupert Clubb, and Martin Tett.